Hey Willem, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm having fun.
Awesome. It's always good to have fun, right?
Sure, yeah.
So
Doing a lot
last
of
time we
demos.
talked, we certainly had fun. We talked about DDD, I think, and how to implement those patterns using .NET.
And entity framework.
And Entity Framework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
There's a
interesting.
lot
But
of cool
this
stuff.
time I think it's entirely different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's entirely different. It doesn't, well, it involves a database a little bit to store something, possibly a username, but no password. We're not going to talk about passwords today, but we're going to talk about authentication and how to log into your application without entering a password,
Cool.
which is interesting, I think, given that passwords get hacked a lot these days.
Yes, I'm so ready to give up on all my passwords. I just want to be in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's using a password manager these days because, using a single password for everything is a bad idea.
Yeah. Still happens, though. I hear people doing that still, but it's not a very good idea.
No,
Definitely
it's best
not.
to have a separate password for everything, but I think that it's even better to not have a password at all and use a different method. And that's what I'm going to show today.
Cool.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued. Show us.
Yeah. So before we start diving into any code, I love doing code, but I think since we're talking security, it might be a good idea to first discuss a little bit what we're going to talk about. So as we mentioned, when you log into an application, you typically enter your email address and your password, and you hit enter, and then you log into a web application. Things like Twitter, Facebook, your work account also. A lot of people will also have other methods of logging in these days. So, for example, I can log in using my fingerprint or my face. That's something that I am, actually. Another method that you could also use to log in is using something that you have. Think of a smart card, for example. That's something that you have, and you push it into your laptop, and then you can use that to log in. So you either have something you have something you have, or it's something that you are. So the biometric stuff that you can use to log in. Most people will use a password, but as we know, those get hacked quite frequently. And the solution to that these days is to use a second factor. So first you log in using your password, and then you enter a second code on your mobile phone, or you touch the fingerprint scanner on your mobile phone, or you use your face as a second factor, that sort of stuff. That basically stops hackers, because if they guess your password somehow, you have reused it and the website got hacked, or they apparently found it in a dictionary somewhere. And then there's the second factor that basically stops the hackers from getting into your account unless they have that second thing. So you could log in using any combination of these things, basically. However, today I'm going to show a different method of logging in on your web application. Because I think it would be nice if I don't have to remember a password at all. That might be useful. In this case, what I'm going to do is a combination of two things. I'm going to use something that I know, a temporary password. So we're going to generate a password for the user that's only valid for a very short time. And I'm going to send that password to the user's email address. That's something that they have access to. So I'm going to use two factors actually to log in, but it will happen in one swoop, if you will. Is this 100% secure? Well, it's as secure as a password, except for the fact that this password is only valid for a few minutes, and you can set it as short as you want. So you can say 30 seconds or a minute, or you do have to think about usability there, but it's a short-lived password going into something that you have, in this case, an email address. So that's what we're going to do today. I think it's a pretty neat solution for web applications that don't want to run into the problem of having to build a reset password page. Oops, I forgot my password. Everybody has that from time to time. Or any other problems getting hacked and all the passwords are lost. That doesn't happen with this method, because you're basically not storing a password. You're generating a temporary password. And if that's lost, that's fine, because I can generate another one. This whole solution is based on a demo application that I've made, TastyBeans. TastyBeans is a, I'm going to be perfectly honest here, it's a big solution. There's like 12 microservices in there. The goal is actually to demonstrate a number of things. It's a coffee application. So you go up to their website and you can sign up for a subscription. And then once a month, you receive a package of coffee. It's all fake, of course. It's a demo application. But the idea is when you sign up for this application, we generate a login for you. And all you have to do the next time, if you want to change your subscription or do other stuff, you go up to the website, you enter your email address, and then you can log in using that. It's all up on GitHub. It's open, so you can download it. You can run away with it if you want, or learn a few things from the journey that I took. It runs on Kubernetes at the moment. It's a microservice application, so if you want to give this a try, you can go to my GitHub account and give that a shot. Yeah. So before we actually dive into the code, the application is looking like this. I can say log out first, of course. I can say login, and I can enter my email address. Let me look that up quickly in my simple code. I can say my awesome email address. I don't know if this domain actually exists, but it doesn't matter because I have a development server. I can enter submit, and basically what it says now to me is, oh, yeah, cool, thanks. I've sent you the magic login link, and the magic login link looks like this. It's a link that you can click. I will copy that. I will put that in my notepad, I should say. Basically what happens is this. It says, dear user, please confirm your login using a temporary password. This is my temporary password. Then it has a bunch of other stuff. Basically, it tells the application how to redirect my user after I've logged in. But this is the important bit. That's actually a temporary password. So when I click the link, what I will do is we'll load up the application and it completes my login. I haven't entered any password. It just works. So what happens under the covers is actually this. When I'm the user here and I'm working on a front end. The front end is made in Blazor. So I will show you a little bit of code in there. It's not too interesting, actually, because you could do the same technique that I'm showing today in Blazor, but then you would have to use something like Identity Server or in a regular ASP.NET Core web application. It's not like you need the Identity Server bit at all. I think that's hopeful for people that don't want to get involved into OAuth 2 and that crazy stuff. So the user goes up to the login page. That's what I clicked first in the front end. Then the front end says, oh, I don't know how to handle that, so let's do a redirect to the authentication service. The authentication service then discovers you're not logged in at the moment. So what it will do is it will show me a login page. And the login page has one field. It has an email address that I have to enter. So I enter my personal email address that I used to register my account first. Then when I click submit, the authentication service will generate a temporary password for me. It's 6 characters, but it could be a longer string if you want. That temporary password is then stored for the time being for, let's say, 5 minutes. And it will generate an email containing a special link that includes that temporary password that I used to log in. This email server will send it to my user. I will get a neat email, of course, if it's a production application. In my case, it's a sample thing. And I can click the link, and the link will go up to the authentication service again and say, confirm the login of this user using the temporary password. The authentication service will then check if the temporary password is valid still for that specific user, and then log in and redirect me back to the front-end application, in this case using an access token. Of course, if you are using ASP.NET Core MVC, using controllers, it will just do a redirect to the page where you were before you started the login process. In this case, since I'm using a single page application, it will be redirected a access token so I can call the APIs. So given that we have this flow, how does this part actually work? Because this is the interesting part. I just enter my email address. I don't enter a password at all. And then this bit is interesting, generating an email with a magic link so I can log in, and then checking that stuff. Let's take a look at the code and see what happens in the application when I try to log in. I will switch my view mode to a slightly bigger version of what we're doing. Okay, so in the application, in the TastyBeans application, there's a number of services. One of them is the identity server. And the identity server is responsible for the login flow that I just showed on the PowerPoint presentation. And it has 4 projects in it that are noteworthy, if you will. There's an API that's basically the HTTP connection layer at the top of the application. Then there's an application layer with some extra things like event handlers and events. This is used to handle a customer registered event. So you're not actually registering at the identity server in this case, but you're registering in the registration service that will lead up to an event, and that will generate a user account. And then there's a domain layer that has some domain stuff, basically modeling an application user. And then there's finally some persistence involved, the application DB context. I'll show you everything in detail in a minute, but this is roughly the structure of my application. The API in this case doesn't have a REST API, but it has pages. There's a login page. I can minimize this a little bit. This is all in HTML. Basically, what it says, it has an email field and a submit button. That's the first step that it takes. And when I click the submit button, it does the following. So I have a method here on this page that says on post async. So when I click the submit button, it does an HTTP post back to this page. And what it sends to me is the email field, of course. And what I do is first I make sure that the input data is valid. So the email address is required. So I make sure that that is filled. Otherwise, I can't find the user. And when it is valid, I will say, OK, let's find the user first based on the email of that user. If it is valid, I will generate a temporary token for that user using a token provider, a custom token provider. And I should explain this a little bit. Basically, what happens in ASP.NET Core is whenever you need a security-based token for anything, so that could be for activating your account, for example, that uses an activation token that's produced by a token provider. If you need a second factor, so you log in with a username and password first, and then you have a second check with a 6-number authentication code, that's also going through a token provider. Basically, what you say to a token provider is, dear token provider, give me a token for a specific purpose. That's the second part here. So I have a custom token provider that is a passwordless login token provider, and I'm asking it for a passwordless login token. That gives me back a 6-character string. That's basically my temporary password. When I have that temporary password, I'm generating a new page URL, and I'm saying I want a URL to a page in my application called confirm login. And this page needs a couple of things. So it needs my temporary password, the token, and it needs a user ID because it needs to verify the username and password. I didn't enter that username and password, but the computer did. So that's the difference in this case from a regular login. And what I want is a return URL. So it's very similar to a regular login, saying that normally I would enter a username and password, and the password is something that I found out and I figured out what to take for that. But in this case, the password is generated by the server, and it's only valid for a few minutes. That's a big difference for a passwordless login. OK, so I have the page URL. I need to make that absolute. The reason for that is that this helper method that I'm calling only generates a relative URL based on the root of my website. And I'm sending this URL over email, so I need to include the full domain name and the protocol that I'm using. Otherwise, it won't work. So what I do then, if I generated a proper URL that I can send over email, I can send the actual email to the user. In this case, it's pretty boring. It basically says, please log in using this magic link. And the magic link is my login URL. And then I do a redirect. So that's the first part of this flow. Once I have my email and I open the email, I go up to the confirm login page. It's empty because you never see the content of this page. It doesn't redirect to another page afterwards. But what happens is when I open this page is the following. I perform an HTTP GET using my browser. I'm opening the link, and I get a user ID and a token and a return URL. The first thing I do is find out, do I have a valid user for this one? If yes, I'm going to say, user manager, please verify my user token using my passwordless login token provider. I use the passwordless login provider to generate the temporary password, and I need to use the same token provider to verify it. Basically, it does a lookup in the database, and it pulls out a hashed version of this code, and then it does a compare between the two and say, yeah, that's the correct one. If that succeeds, I do a sign-in. So I create an authentication cookie, just like you would do normally in the web application. And I redirect to the original return URL that I got from the front end. And that's basically it in the process of logging in. And now you're wondering, of course, but how do I actually make this passwordless login provider available in my application? And what does it do? So it's not too hard, actually. I found this out a while ago, and I figured, that's not too bad. What happens is I create a new class, in this case, PasswordlessLoginTokenProvider, and you need to derive that class from TOTP security stamp-based token provider. It's a mouthful. Let me break it down a little bit. TOTP stands for timed one-time password. OTP is one-timed password, and I want a timed version of that. That means that this password is only valid for a limited number of minutes. OTP, the one-time password thing, is actually, I can use this password only once to log in, and afterwards it's deleted. It doesn't exist anymore. And the other thing that's really important here is the security stamp also. It basically uses encryption to make sure that there's not a chance you can tamper with the password in the database and then make it work anyway. So if you try to modify the database and change the temporary password to something that's valid for you, basically you're guessing the password, then it won't work because it's signed and you can't change that. And this security token provider works for the application user class. That's the user that's logging in with the password, with the email address that I had. I have to do two things to implement this token provider. The first one is, can I generate two-factor authentication tokens? And the answer is no, I don't want to do that. You could do that, and then you would be able to use this token provider as a second factor for logging in. So for example, what you could do is have the user enter a username and a password, and then send them an email with an additional validation. That also works, but I'm not using that. Instead, I'm saying, if you're going to generate a token with this token provider, I want to make sure that it's uniquely identifiable. And in this case, I'm saying this token is valid for passwordless login with the purpose of logging in without a password. The purpose is what you specify in the login page for generating the token, and then the email address. And that's how it stores it in the database. This purpose field is important. This is how it identifies which token to validate in the database. And that's about it for creating the login token provider. All we have to do now is configure it in the application to be used for logging in. And for that, I have to change the program class. So for those that are not entirely familiar with ASP.NET Core 6, they changed the way you're building a startup. Normally, you would have a startup class. You can still do that, but it's not the way to go forward anymore. Instead, they are using something called a web application builder class. That's what I'm using here. And the builder accepts configuration, services, logging, all kinds of stuff to build the web application. Once you have it configured, you can say builder.build, and it will create the actual web application. And then you can say, OK, please configure the middleware for the application and start it up at the end. Do a run. This would normally happen in the configure method of your startup class up until here. And this part, this top part where I have all the services, happens in the configure services method. So just so you know where to look in the application, because this can be quite long. In this case, the interesting bit is I first need to set up Razor pages in my application. That's needed to show the login page and the login confirmed page, etc. I need to set up the database. In this case, I'm using Entity Framework Core. I specify the application DB context, and I say, please connect to my default database. This is configured for authentication, meaning that it derives from identity DB context, as you would normally do if you want to build a login page. That's not changed from what you normally would do. And then comes the second bit, and that is I need to set up identity. And in this case, I'm saying, OK, builder.services, add identity. And I'm saying I want an application user to be able to log in using a regular role. And I have some additional stuff for my demo application where I want to make sure that I don't have to confirm this account or anything. In production, I would advise against this, especially if you're using a passwordless login. That's kind of weird if you don't confirm the email address. If somebody mistyped their email address, they wouldn't be able to log in at all using this technique. So I have the identity configured. I'm telling ASP.NET Core, please store everything in my database. And then you would enter add default token providers. I mentioned a few minutes ago that ASP.NET Core normally has these things called reset password, for example, and password forgotten. These pages use a token provider to generate a temporary token that you can use to reset your password. That's basically the same concept as I'm using here for passwordless login. If you're not using passwordless login, then that would be the end of it. That would be all you need to do. In this case, I need to say, OK, I need to add another token provider with the name PasswordlessLoginTokenProvider, the one that I used in my page, and then specify the type of token provider that I want to connect to them. That's all I need to do to make sure that I can generate tokens for logging in. And afterwards, it's a matter of setting up authentication and authorization and make sure that I have everything in my middleware. In this case, I added authentication in my middleware, authorization, and the Razor pages is important here. So I can actually show the pages and allow the user to log in. And yeah, that's basically all the code you need to get this working for passwordless login. It's not too much work, but it's kind of hard to find if you don't know where to look. So yeah, guys, that's it. That's how you do passwordless login in ASP.NET Core.
Very cool.
Great, Willem.
Yeah. It's actually amazing to see how little code you need to set this all up. So you see that we've come a long way. I've battled with this authentication, authorization stuff with tokens way back when Identity Server just came around and all that ASP.NET stuff. It was hard. You really need to know the concepts, and I think that's still true. So you really need to know how the stuff works, and also the sequence diagram that you showed. That's something that you really have to grasp before you go and battle this stuff. But the code is actually pretty easy, so it's quite amazing to see. So thanks for showing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool.
And so if anybody wants to try this, it's up on my GitHub. Yeah. I'm sure we can share the link to that after the video is public. So
yeah, we'll put that in the description. So
Cool.
So everybody check out the repository, and also check out the rest of the demo because it's a very cool application. So check it all out. There's lots more in there other than a passwordless login. So yeah, pretty cool. Thanks, Willem.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone at home for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like dotnetFlix, of course, subscribe to the channel, and see you at the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.